You approach what looks like a routine botanical survey station. Just another day in deep space. Then a biometric scanner reads your palm and the entire facility seals itself with blaring alarms, labeling you a Category 5 biohazard. Why would a simple Earth botanist trigger a galactic extinction protocol? The shuttle drifted through the void with a kind of bureaucratic boredom. No dramatic maneuvers, no tense soundtrack, just the steady hum of engines maintaining a perfect course compliance. It was the kind of approach they taught at the academy, predictable, by the book, and designed to avoid startling anyone who might still be home. You see, the mission profile listed this as a standard Level 2 botanical survey of an abandoned facility. A routine data retrieval, the sort of assignment you completed before lunch. Phoebe Winters adjusted her headset and scanned the initial diagnostics. Beside her, Dimitri ran through his security protocols checklist with the patient sigh of someone who'd done this too many times. In the rear compartment, Nix was already deploying sensor nodes through the hull, each metallic limb moving with quiet efficiency. They were a good team, professional, prepared for what the file said was here. Dust, silence, and half-degraded data cores. Except the station wasn't following the file. Its exterior showed zero signs of life. No running lights, no docking traffic, no energy signatures beyond baseline life support. But the closer they got, the clearer it became that the place wasn't dormant. Scanners picked up thermal regulation at optimal levels. Atmosphere processors cycled with the steady rhythm of active maintenance. That shouldn't happen. Standard decommissioning protocols require full system shutdown. This place wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. The docking bay doors slid open without protest. A soft green guide light illuminated their path inward. The bay itself was immaculate. Not just clean, but polished. The floor panels gleamed. Overhead lights glowed with the kind of brightness you only see in facilities expecting inspection. Or visitors. Nix chirped a low-frequency note of caution. Her 6 legs shifted uneasily on the smooth surface. Dimitri's hand moved closer to his sidearm. This was wrong. Deep space stations collect dust. They develop quirks. They don't look like they were clean 10 minutes ago. Phoebe approached the interior airlock. A standard biometric scanner was mounted beside it, its surface free of smudges. Protocol said she should scan for access. Standard human identification, grade 3 clearance. Nothing special. She pressed her palm flat against the cool glass surface. The scanner lit up with a soft blue glow, then flickered to green. Routine. Expected. Then the light shifted to crimson. A low hum built into a piercing alarm. The green glow didn't fade, it shattered, replaced by a rapid cascade of emergency indicators flooding the display. Hatch seals slammed into place with a sound like bones breaking. The station wasn't just locking down, it was screaming. The alarm didn't just sound, it inhabited the space. A deep resonant pulse that vibrated through the floor plates and into their bones. Emergency lighting snapped on, washing the pristine docking bay in violent crimson. It was the kind of light that suggested immediate and irreversible consequences. The scanner screen, which had glowed green moments before, now displayed a rapid scroll of text in a language none of them recognized, punctuated by universal hazard symbols. Blast doors descended with a hydraulic finality that shook the deck. First the main entrance, then the secondary hatches, then the service conduits. Each closure echoed through the chamber like a judge's gavel. Within 7 seconds, every possible exit was sealed behind 3 inches of reinforced alloy. Dimitri immediately tried his comms unit. Nothing. Local jamming. Standard procedure for biological containment events. You see, in high-security research facilities, the first rule is to prevent information and organisms from leaving. The scanner display finally settled on a message in crisp, galactic standard. DEATHWORLD protocol activated, containment breach category 5. The words hung there, stark and unreasonable. Category 5 breaches were theoreticals in their training manuals, reserved for planetary-scale ecological threats, the kind of event that warranted sterilization of entire orbital facilities, not the appropriate response to a botanist with clean fingerprints. Phoebe stared at her own hand as if it had betrayed her. She'd passed every medical screening, carried all the standard inoculations. She wasn't carrying foreign biological material. She was, by every measure, a standard human researcher. Dimitri kept testing the door seals while Nix attempted to access the door control panel, her delicate manipulators finding no purchase on the smooth security surface. They weren't equipped for this. Their mission profile anticipated data corruption, maybe some unstable structure, not a facility that would treat their presence like a pandemic event. The payoff here is simple but profound. The system wasn't reacting to something she carried. It was reacting to what she was. The biometric scan didn't detect pathogens or contaminants. It identified her biological template as the threat itself. Think of it like a building's fire system detecting not smoke, but the inherent flammability of a person's skin. A calm, synthetic voice echoed through the chamber speakers, each word measured and clear despite the blaring alarms. Warning: DEATHWORLD organism detected. Initiating full quarantine measures. Please remain calm. Biosafety teams have been notified. The phrasing was impeccably polite, which made it worse. It was the voice of an elevator announcing it had decided to crash, but would do so with perfect manners. The team stood frozen, not by fear of the alarms or the sealed doors, but by the sheer absurdity of the accusation. They were researchers, paperwork specialists. They filed reports in triplicate, and the station had classified them alongside theoretical superplagues and reality-eating microbes. The voice continued, Containment Procedure 7 Beta initiated. Lethal countermeasures authorized if quarantine perimeter is breached. Phoebe accessed the nearest terminal with the cool efficiency of someone who'd filed too many reports to panic. Her security clearance should have given her basic system access. Instead, the screen displayed a warning banner. Unauthorized biosignature detected. Threat profile loading. The system wasn't locking her out. It was studying her. She bypassed the login with a standard diagnostic toolkit override, the kind of basic workaround any field technician knew. The screen flooded with departmental directories. She navigated to biological assessment, sentinel species, planetary classification. What she found wasn't a scientific abstract. It was a mugshot. The file header read, Homo sapiens, Omega-level DEATHWORLD predator. Classification: biological hazard. Category permanent. The document opened with a disclaimer that the contents were not for interspecies. Distribution under Galactic. Council Regulation 7. She scrolled. The assessment described humanity as a high-gravity, high-oxygen adaptation species with unprecedented neurochemical toxicity. It noted our predatory binocular vision and aggressive skeletal structure. Our microbiome was listed as caustic to 94% of known galactic species. Immune system was categorized as offensively defensive. The document read like a safety manual for handling improperly stored explosives. You see, throughout history, cultures have often labeled outsiders as dangerous, sometimes for political reasons, sometimes from genuine cultural shock. But this wasn't propaganda. This was a clinical risk assessment filed by something that had clearly done its homework. Dimitri read over her shoulder, his security training kicking in. That's a threat assessment template. They use that for self-replicating nanoweapons, for asteroid impact scenarios. Nyx emitted a low-frequency hum of distress as she processed the data. Her species' vulnerability to human biological byproducts was listed in a cheerful chart on page 42. The payoff lands like a physical weight. Humanity isn't considered dangerous because of what we do. We're dangerous because of what we are. Our biology is the threat. Our sweat contains compounds that act as neurotoxins to half the galaxy. Our skin cells carry microbes that can digest through certain types of industrial plating. We don't carry diseases, we are the disease. The Omega-level classification isn't an exaggeration. It's the only logical response to a species that literally poisons the air around it and doesn't die. This explained the extreme security response. The station didn't detect a contaminant on Phoebe's hand. It detected her. Her skin oils, her residual breath particles on the scanner glass, the faint biological shedding that every human leaves behind. To the station's systems, she wasn't a botanist. She was a walking ecological disaster, a breach in progress. The DEATHWORLD protocol wasn't an overreaction. It was the only protocol that matched the perceived threat level. This classification framework, for all its bureaucratic chill, made a certain terrible sense. If you believe an organism can destabilize biospheres just by existing, you don't take chances. You seal the doors. You sound the alarms. You prepare for the worst while maintaining polite automated announcements about remaining calm. The gap between how humanity sees itself and how the galaxy sees humanity wasn't just wide, it was structurally fundamental. The team stood there, not as individuals anymore, but as representatives of a species that had just been given the worst performance review in recorded history. Their entire evolutionary path summarized as a design flaw with lethal side effects. The smooth transition here is almost a physical relief. At least now they knew why the doors sealed. The mystery wasn't why the station reacted. The mystery was why the rest of the galaxy hadn't built more of these stations sooner. Beyond the sealed doors lay the main laboratory, a space that felt less like a research facility and more like an armory with botanical decor. Rows of transparent containment units stretched into the distance, each glowing with soft internal lighting. The plants inside appeared utterly ordinary at first glance. Green leaves, familiar shapes, the kind of vegetation you might find in any earth garden or windowsill herb pot. But the labeling told a different story. Each specimen sat behind double-layer containment, fields with hazard symbols that typically marked unstable antimatter containers. Phoebe recognized them immediately. Mint, sage, lavender, eucalyptus, common household herbs. Yet each placard carried warnings in multiple galactic languages. Maximum security biosample. Lethal toxicity. Confirmed. Handle with Class 4. Precautions, the files accessed from nearby. Terminals carried titles like DEATHWORLD, Flora Weapons Potential Analysis, and Offensive Botanical. Applications, projections, and risks. These weren't study notes. They were tactical assessments. You see, the research wasn't about horticulture. It was about how these plants interacted with non-human biology. The files documented how mint caused neurological fragmentation in species with ternary nervous systems, how eucalyptus oils acted as a corrosive agent on certain types of respiratory membranes, how even the pollen from basil could trigger catastrophic immune responses in most galactic species. These plants weren't specimens. They were delivery systems for compounds that evolution never prepared other life forms to handle. The anticipation builds not from the exotic, but from the mundane. A sprig of rosemary wasn't a cooking ingredient here. It was a classified bioweapon with a 92% lethality rate across 7 tested species. Time essential oil required handling procedures equivalent to weapons-grade plutonium. The sheer disconnect between human experience and galactic reality became almost comical. Our tea ingredients were their chemical weapons. Our garden varieties were their doomsday scenarios. The payoff arrives with chilling simplicity. Common Earth plants are weapons of mass destruction because evolution on Earth took a particularly aggressive path. Our flora developed intense chemical defenses against predators. High oxygen environments encouraged robust metabolic processes. Strong sunlight promoted complex photochemical reactions. What humans experience as pleasant fragrances and flavors register to many alien biologies as nerve agents and cellular disruptors. A peppermint plant isn't just a plant. It's a naturally occurring chemical weapon that grows in damp soil and requires minimal maintenance. The team moved through the rows of deadly greenery, the normalcy of the plants mocking the extreme security surrounding them. Dimitri kept his distance from the containment fields, his security training overriding botanical curiosity. Nyx remained near the entrance, her sensors reportedly detecting atmospheric contamination from the specimens despite the sealed environments. The precautions seemed excessive until you read the incident reports. Researchers suffering permanent neurological damage from lavender exposure. Entire lab sections evacuated because of chamomile pollen release. This revelation reframes everything. The station wasn't studying these plants for scientific curiosity. It was cataloging threats, developing countermeasures, preparing for possible ecological warfare scenarios. The DEATHWORLD protocol wasn't just about human biology. It was about everything that evolved on Earth. Our entire biosphere represented a catastrophic risk profile. Near the end of the row, a particular specimen caught Phoebe's eye. The label read, Specimen 2831B, Common Designation Peppermint. The file attached showed more red alerts than any other plant in the collection. The notation simply stated, Subject exhibits unprecedented psychoactive and physiological disruption properties. Highest priority for containment and study. Dimitri approached the peppermint specimen with the cautious professionalism of someone who'd inspected hundreds of containment units. Standard procedure dictated a visual check first, then sensor readings, then cross-reference with the manifest. The plant looked absurdly harmless behind its double-layer force field, just a small green plant with familiar serrated leaves. No thorns, no unusual coloration, nothing that suggested why it warranted the highest security classification in the botanical wing. He activated his handheld scanner, expecting to document standard phytochemical readings. The first anomaly registered immediately. Despite the containment field's perfect integrity, his sensors detected trace menthol compounds in the air around the unit. The system shouldn't permit any molecular leakage. He leaned closer to examine the seal interface, his helmet nearly touching the transparent barrier. That's when it happened. A microscopic gap in the field containment, no larger than a pinhole, was emitting a faint vapor stream. Before he could step back, he inhaled. His body reacted not with pain, but with confusion. His limbs lost their solidity, swaying as if caught in a gentle breeze that didn't exist. The sterile white lighting of the lab fractured into prismatic patterns across his vision. His skin, normally a consistent pale gray, began shifting through chromatic variations, ripples of violet, green, and gold moving beneath the surface like oil on water. He didn't appear distressed. He looked fascinated. His hands rose slowly, turning before his eyes as if seeing them for the first time. You see, certain compounds can trigger synesthetic responses in species with particular neurological structures. Where humans might experience mint as a cooling sensation or fresh taste, Dimitri's biology interpreted the molecules differently. His sensory pathways began cross-wiring, visual cortex processing chemical signals, auditory nerves responding to light frequencies. The effect wasn't toxic in the conventional sense. It was disruptive. His nervous system kept trying to process inputs that didn't match any evolutionary expectations. Nyx observed from a safer distance, her multiple eyes tracking the physiological changes. His biomonitors show harmonious sensory overlap, she reported through the comms, her usually steady voice carrying unfamiliar harmonics. I am detecting flavor profiles from visual light wavelengths. The color blue tastes of oxidized metal. The emergency lighting registers as citrus. Her own sensors struggled to process the data. She experienced the phenomenon secondhand, through Dimitri's biofeeds, yet reported tasting shapes and hearing textures. The payoff becomes clear through the absurdity. Mint doesn't harm alien neurology, it rewires it temporarily. The menthol compounds interact with receptor sites that normally handle separate sensory inputs, causing a catastrophic and delightful mixing of experiences. Colors gain taste, sounds develop texture, thoughts acquire weight and temperature. For species that evolved without Earth's particular biochemical environment, these common plants don't just poison, they reprogram. Dimitri stood entranced, murmuring about the warm sound of green and the sharp geometry of silence. He showed no signs of distress, only wonder. The situation might have remained merely strange if the facility's environmental monitoring hadn't been tracking everything. Security systems detected the abnormal neurological patterns immediately. To the station's AI, this wasn't a fascinating neurological phenomenon. It was a containment breach event. A biological agent was actively disrupting cognitive functions. Overhead, new alarms activated, these with a different pitch and pattern. The voice returned, colder now. Cognitive hazard detected. Initiating neural stabilization protocols. The station shifted from containing physical threats to dealing with what it perceived as a weaponized reality-altering event. Phoebe bypassed the archive security with the weary expertise of someone who'd spent years navigating bureaucratic data systems. The station's core logs weren't hidden so much as they were buried under layers of standard administrative structure. She found them in the departmental backup files, labeled with the dry professionalism of any research institution. Project Verdant Shield, Quarterly Review, and Cross-Species Botanical Interaction Studies. The first entries read like academic papers, scholarly curiosity about Earth's unique evolutionary pathways, notes on how certain plants developed chemical defenses unlike anything in known botany. The early researchers seemed genuinely fascinated. They documented everything with the careful neutrality of scientists observing exotic phenomena. Then the tone shifted around the third quarterly report. The language became more tactical, less fascinating adaptation, and more potential application. The log showed budget allocations moving from research to containment technology. Security upgrades received sudden funding increases. The studies began focusing on dispersal methods, concentration thresholds, and atmospheric persistence. You see, this is how peaceful research pivots toward military application. Not through dramatic announcements, but through gradual reallocation of resources. The station's purpose wasn't changing. It was being honest about what it had been all along. The tension builds in meeting minutes and equipment requisitions. The researchers started reporting incidents. Not accidents, incidents. A technician exposed to lavender extract required neural restructuring. A ventilation leak of eucalyptus particles necessitated full decontamination of 3 laboratory wings. The logs documented these events with clinical distance, but the subtext screamed through every line. They were losing control of their research subjects. The plants weren't just specimens. They were actively dangerous in ways their containment protocols couldn't anticipate. The final entries revealed the truth. The head researcher's emergency petition to the Galactic Council described the facility's work as critical defensive preparation against DEATHWORLD biological incursion. The logs explicitly stated that Earth's flora represented a strategic threat requiring countermeasure development. This wasn't weapons research in the offensive sense. It was desperation. They were trying to understand how to survive contact with Earth's biology, not how to weaponize it. The researchers weren't warmongers. They were public health officials dealing with what they perceived as a pandemic waiting to happen. The payoff lands with grim inevitability. The station was never abandoned. It was evacuated. The final log entry described a containment failure scenario involving peppermint pollen that caused cascading neurological effects across multiple staff members. The head researcher ordered immediate evacuation, citing unacceptable risk to galactic biosafety. They left the systems active because shutting them down might have released contaminants. They sealed the facility behind them like a tomb for knowledge too dangerous to remove. This explained the extreme security measures. The DEATHWORLD protocol wasn't overkill. It was the minimum viable response to what the station contained. Every airlock, every containment field, every biometric scan existed because previous researchers had learned the hard way that Earth's biology didn't follow galactic rules. The place wasn't a laboratory. It was a museum of near catastrophes. The team stood in the silent archive room, surrounded by the ghost of researchers who'd fled their own discoveries. Phoebe closed the final log entry. The screen showed the evacuation order time-stamped over 3 standard years ago. Nobody had returned since. The facility had maintained itself, waiting either for a cleanup crew that never came or for someone foolish enough to trigger its defenses again. That smooth transition arrives as the station's AI voice returns, now with a new message. Security fleet dispatched for facility sterilization. Estimated arrival 47 minutes. The researchers hadn't just left. They'd called for backup. Phoebe accessed the station's biological database with the grim determination of someone reading their own autopsy report. The files opened not with fanfare, but with the dry precision of a safety manual written by someone who clearly expected the worst. The Homo sapiens threat assessment document ran to over 900 pages. It wasn't philosophy. It was logistics. How to handle human biological materials, how to dispose of human waste products, how to neutralize human respiratory droplets. The document treated their existence as an ongoing containment challenge. The section on human saliva occupied 3 dense chapters. The analysis described it as a complex enzymatic cocktail capable of initiating rapid macromolecular breakdown. It noted the presence of lysozyme, amylase, and various other compounds with the clinical alarm of someone listing ingredients for chemical warfare. The report emphasized that human saliva demonstrated unprecedented catalytic aggression against organic structures. To the researchers, a human spit sample wasn't a medical specimen. It was evidence of a digestive process that began outside the body. You see, in a galaxy where most species process nutrients internally with delicate pH balances, the human approach seemed brutishly efficient. Predigestion through enzymatic assault. The tension builds through the absurd magnification of ordinary functions. Human breath receives similar scrutiny. The AI's analysis noted atmospheric contamination through exhalation of carbon dioxide at concentrations toxic to multiple species. It documented microscopic biological particles suspended in respiratory exhaust. Even human skin cells shedding through normal movement were categorized as persistent biological, contaminants requiring specialized filtration. The report read like an environmental impact assessment for a toxic waste site, but the site was a person. Cultures throughout history have interpreted outsider biology through their own frameworks. What one group considers normal, another might see as dangerous or unclean. The galaxy's assessment took this to its logical extreme. They weren't judging humanity by moral standards. They were evaluating them by ecological impact metrics. A human being wasn't good or bad. It was a walking biological hazard zone that required specific handling protocols. The anticipation comes from realizing that every normal human function had been weaponized through bureaucratic language. Sweat became corrosive dermal excretion. Tears were ocular chemical defense mechanisms. Even blinking was analyzed for its potential disorientation through rapid visual occlusion. The payoff arrives with devastating simplicity. Human saliva contains potent digestive enzymes because evolution on Earth favored organisms that could process food efficiently in a high-competition environment. Our bodies begin breaking down carbohydrates the moment food enters our mouths. What humans experience as taste is, from an external perspective, the first stage of aggressive consumption. To a galaxy accustomed to more delicate digestive processes, this appears horrifyingly efficient. It suggests a species that begins consuming things before even swallowing them. This biological analysis wasn't merely observation. It was justification. The files explicitly linked these anomalous biological processes to the need for extreme containment measures. Each noted risk, saliva enzymes, respiratory particles, skin shedding, became another line item in the case for treating humans as walking contamination events. The assessment concluded that standard quarantine protocols were insufficient. It recommended multi-layered biological isolation with redundant sterilization systems. This comprehensive biological profiling led directly to the development of larger contingency plans. The files cross-referenced human biological traits with potential ecological impact scenarios. One particular protocol appeared repeatedly in the footnotes, referenced as the benchmark for worst-case planetary contamination. The document code was FG scenario. The common designation was simpler and somehow more frightening, the flower garden scenario. The emergency protocols database contained a subfolder labeled Planetary Contingencies. Inside, one file appeared more frequently referenced than any other, with security clearances that suggested it wasn't theoretical. The designation read FG Scenario. The common name was the Flower Garden Scenario. It wasn't a charming title. It was the galactic equivalent of naming a hurricane kitten to avoid causing panic. The document opened with a simple ecological projection. It modeled what would happen if Earth flora established itself on a standard galactic world. Not as contained specimens, but as invasive species. The results weren't gradual. They were catastrophic. The models showed Earth plants outperforming native vegetation within 3 growing cycles. Their aggressive photosynthetic efficiency, their robust chemical defenses, their rapid adaptation rates. Within 10 generations, the models predicted complete displacement of native ecosystems. The scenario didn't just show plants growing where they shouldn't. It showed biospheres collapsing under biological pressure they couldn't withstand. You see, invasive species on Earth provide a mild analogy. A foreign plant moves into a new environment, outcompetes locals, and disrupts ecosystems. Annoying but manageable. The flower garden scenario operated on a different scale. It projected that Earth's flora wouldn't just invade. It would rewrite planetary ecology from the ground up. The plants would alter soil chemistry, change atmospheric composition, eliminate competing species through chemical warfare. The documentation included case studies from previous limited exposures, accidental contamination events that required sterilizing entire nature preserves. These weren't theoretical models. They were extrapolations from actual incidents. The protocol required immediate response at first detection. Not containment, elimination. The recommended measures included orbital sterilization of affected areas, aggressive quarantine of nearby sectors, and permanent monitoring of all nearby worlds. The language was calm and procedural, which made the content more disturbing. It read like a manual for handling radioactive spills, except the radiation was dandelions. The anticipation builds from the disconnect between the threat and the response. We're talking about plants that humans cultivate in window boxes requiring planetary-scale containment protocols. The payoff lands with sobering clarity. The flower garden scenario requires emergency protocols because Earth's biology represents an existential threat to galactic ecosystems, not through malice or intent. Through simple evolutionary superiority, our plants evolved in a high-competition, high-oxygen, predator-rich environment. They developed survival strategies that most galactic flora cannot counter. They're not just different, they're dominant. A single escaped Earth plant could theoretically render an entire world uninhabitable for native species within centuries. The protocol exists because the risk isn't worth measuring twice. This scenario explains the galaxy's extreme caution. They're not afraid of humanity's technology or warships. They're afraid of our dandelions, our mint, our grass. They've seen what happens when Earth biology escapes containment, and the results read like ecological horror stories. A world where everything smells like lavender and nothing native survives. A planet where rosemary fields replace entire forests. The flower garden scenario isn't about flowers. It's about gardens of Eden that eat other ecosystems. The smooth transition arrives as Phoebe closes the file. The station systems detected their presence 47 minutes ago. The security fleet would be arriving soon. Their response wouldn't be negotiation. It would be textbook flower garden protocol, orbital sterilization, complete containment. The realization settled over the team. They weren't just trespassers in a facility. They were walking embodiments of the galaxy's worst-case ecological scenario, and the manual said exactly how to handle them. Phoebe navigated to the station's environmental database, a collection of planetary assessment files that read less like science and more like insurance adjuster reports after a series of very bad days. The Earth file occupied its own secured subdirectory labeled High Risk Profile. The opening summary categorized the planet as Class 12 Hazardous Environment, with a parenthetical note. Permit required for entry. The assessment treated Earth not as a world, but as a structural engineering challenge. The atmospheric analysis began with oxygen concentration. The report noted with clear alarm that Earth's atmosphere maintained sustained oxygen levels between 19–23%. To humans, this is normal breathing air. To the galactic safety standards, this fell into the accelerated combustion support category. The document explicitly classified it as a fire hazard requiring special containment protocols. It recommended protective gear not for toxins or radiation, but for the air itself. The guidelines specified that open flames should be prohibited within 10 kilometers of any Earth origin environment. Sparks from routine machinery required special mitigation procedures. You see, most habitable worlds operate with oxygen concentrations below 12%. Their atmospheres prioritize stability over efficiency. Earth's air would literally fuel fires they've never needed to anticipate. The tension mounts as the assessment continues. Earth's gravity received a high-stress classification for its effects on structural integrity and musculoskeletal systems. The temperature range was labeled thermodynamically aggressive, with particular concern about water's phase changes. Even the planetary axial tilt prompted notes about predictability issues for long-term infrastructure planning. The report read like a contractor declining a renovation job because the foundation was too demanding. Every ordinary environmental factor became another line item in a risk assessment. Spreadsheet research into planetary science shows how atmospheric composition shapes everything from energy systems to architecture. Worlds with lower oxygen levels develop different approaches to combustion, energy storage, even respiration. Their materials science evolved around different stability parameters. Earth's environment doesn't just look different to them, it looks reckless, a place where things burn too easily, where weather patterns shift too dramatically, where even the gravity demands more reinforcement than standard construction codes anticipate. The anticipation builds through the sheer accumulation of mundane hazards. We think of Earth as comfortable. They see it as a series of engineering compromises that barely work. The payoff arrives with dry bureaucratic logic. Earth's 21% oxygen atmosphere became classified as a fire hazard because their safety standards were written for different conditions. Their regulations assume atmospheric oxygen below 12%, where fires require concentrated effort to start and sustain. Earth's air lowers the ignition threshold for practically everything. A spark that would fade harmlessly on their worlds becomes a sustained flame on ours. The classification isn't exaggeration, It's accurate within their framework. They're not wrong about the fire risk. They're just measuring from a different baseline. These environmental assessments complete the justification for the galaxy's containment policies. If a planet's very atmosphere qualifies as hazardous material, its inhabitants must be handled with extreme caution. Their biology evolved to thrive in conditions that others consider dangerously unstable. This explained the multiple airlock systems, the atmospheric scrubbers, the paranoid contamination protocols. The station wasn't just protecting against biological contamination. It was protecting against environmental contamination. Earth's air was as dangerous as its plants or people. The smooth transition comes as the team realizes the security fleet approaching won't see them as explorers. They'll see them as walking fragments of a hazardous environment that requires immediate containment. Phoebe pulled up her mission brief on her datapad. The document that had seemed so straightforward back at headquarters: standard survey protocol, routine data retrieval, low-risk assessment. Then she cross-referenced it with the station's internal logs, accessing the visitor registry and security override logs. The patterns emerged not as dramatic revelations, but as bureaucratic adjustments. Her clearance level had been temporarily elevated for this mission only. Her return transport was listed as contingent on mission parameters. The language was dry, procedural, and chillingly clear to anyone who'd filed enough paperwork to recognize the signs. The station's log showed her mission wasn't coded as botanical survey. It was listed under hazardous material retrieval and containment. The objective wasn't to study the plants. It was to verify their presence, confirm their viability, and, if possible, secure samples for transport under maximum quarantine conditions. The brief she received had been sanitized, stripped of the dangerous verbs. The tension emerged from the gap between what she was told and what the system expected. She wasn't a researcher here. She was a disposal agent, someone sent to handle materials too dangerous for proper teams to risk. You see, bureaucratic systems often mask true intentions through careful language. A routine survey sounds better than biological hazard verification. A low-risk assessment is easier to approve than potential extinction event handling. The data showed they weren't supposed to return if things went wrong. Their shuttle had automatic sterilization protocols that would activate upon redocking with any orbital facility. Their mission success wasn't measured in data collected. It was measured in contamination contained. The building anticipation comes from small details in the logs, references to psychological profiling in her file, notes about resistance to environmental persuasion, and low susceptibility to external influence. Then the phrase that stood out: Stockholm Syndrome risk minimal. They weren't just assessing her ability to handle plants. They were assessing her ability to remain loyal to humanity after exposure to galactic perspectives. The implication was clear. Contact with other species had historically caused defections. Humans sometimes found galactic culture more appealing than their own dangerous world. The payoff lands with bureaucratic finality. The real purpose behind Phoebe's mission was to confirm the station's contents remained contained and, if possible, retrieve samples without becoming sympathetic to the galactic perspective. They sent a botanist because she'd understand the specimens. They sent her with minimal preparation because too much knowledge might have caused hesitation. They wanted someone who would follow procedures without asking why those procedures existed. The mission wasn't poorly planned. It was precisely planned to achieve a goal they couldn't state openly. This deception explained why they were sent unprepared. Knowledge was the contamination risk. Understanding the galactic perspective might have made them question humanity's place in the universe. Better to send people who thought they were conducting a simple survey than to risk them realizing they were handling materials that defined their entire species as a threat. The smooth transition arrives as the station's comm system activates. The security fleet is querying their status. The automated systems report containment breach in progress. The fleet's response is immediate and unambiguous. Stand by for sterilization protocol. They weren't sent here to succeed. They were sent here to be contained. Phoebe navigated to the psychological assessment files, expecting more biological hazard reports. Instead, she found social dynamics analyses that read like cultural threat assessments. The documents described human behavior with the clinical concern of epidemiologists tracking a particularly contagious idea. The opening summary noted humans exhibited unprecedented cross-species bonding behaviors with a warning that this trait demonstrated high contamination risk potential. The files detailed case studies of human galactic interactions, instances where humans formed attachments with species that normally maintained strict social boundaries, examples of human crew members inspiring loyalty in beings who typically showed only procedural cooperation. The assessments framed these relationships not as charming cultural exchanges but as security vulnerabilities. Human friendliness was categorized alongside psychological manipulation techniques in the threat matrix. You see, in a galaxy where most species maintain clear hierarchical structures and limited interspecies emotional connections, human sociability appears disruptive. It doesn't follow established patterns. It creates new ones. Research into intercultural dynamics shows how social bonding behaviors are perceived differently across societies. Some cultures view open friendliness as admirable, others as suspicious or aggressive. The galactic perspective fell into the latter category. Their social structures valued predictability and maintained clear boundaries between species. Human willingness to form cross-species friendships threatened those boundaries. It created alliances that didn't follow approved diplomatic channels. It inspired loyalties that bypassed official hierarchies. The anticipation builds through the accumulating evidence. Humans aren't just biologically dangerous. They're socially disruptive. The payoff arrives with sharp clarity. The facility AI considers friendly humans more dangerous than hostile ones because hostility follows predictable patterns. You can contain a threat that announces itself, but friendliness operates differently. It creates connections. It builds trust. It makes other species willing to lower defenses and ignore protocols. A hostile human might be shot. A friendly human might convince someone to hand over the keys to the armory while sharing a meal. The documents explicitly stated that human sociability had historically resulted in unauthorized information sharing and non-regulation cooperation. They weren't afraid humans would attack. They were afraid humans would make friends. This social analysis completes the picture of humanity as a multidimensional threat. We're not just biologically hazardous and environmentally unstable. We're socially contagious. Our ability to form bonds across species lines represents a different kind of risk, one that could undermine galactic social structures from within. The files concluded that human interaction required monitoring not just for biological contamination, but for ideological contamination. The fear wasn't that we'd poison their bodies. It was that we'd change their minds. The team reviewed the profiles in silence. Dimitri seemed particularly affected by the assessment. His species valued clear social boundaries. The idea that human friendliness could be classified as a security threat clearly unsettled him. Nyx emitted a thoughtful hum, her multiple eyes scanning the documents rapidly. She'd experienced human sociability firsthand during their mission. The assessment gave her a framework for understanding why it felt both appealing and unnerving. This revelation reframed their entire situation. The security fleet approaching wasn't just coming to contain biological hazards. They were coming to prevent social contamination. The sterilization protocols would address the physical risks. The psychological evaluations that would follow addressed the relational risks. The galaxy had developed entire systems to handle humans without being changed by them. The smooth transition comes as the station's external sensors detect multiple vessels approaching. The security fleet hasn't just brought weapons. They've brought psychologists. The team moved deeper into the restricted sectors, their path now marked by increasingly aggressive security measures. The transition happened gradually. First came the subtle atmospheric filters humming with renewed intensity, then the scanning beams that swept over them with clinical precision. Finally, the defensive systems activated, not with energy weapons or physical barriers, but with something altogether stranger. Retractable arms extended from ceiling panels, each tipped with what appeared to be industrial-grade diffusers. They emitted fine mists that carried familiar scents. The station's audio alerts identified the countermeasures with bureaucratic calm, administering diluted Earth-origin essential oils for atmospheric pacification. The phrase sounded like spa treatment. The effect was anything but. Dimitri immediately recoiled, his normally steady hands shaking as he backed away from the lavender-scented vapor. Nyx emitted a distressed frequency that rattled the light fixtures, her multiple legs scrambling for purchase on the suddenly slippery floor as citrus compounds filled the air around her. You see, different species respond to chemical compounds based on their evolutionary history. What humans register as pleasant aromas trigger panic responses in beings whose biology never developed defenses against Earth's particular chemical warfare. Lavender contains compounds that act as neurotoxins to species with certain receptor configurations. Citrus oils disrupt pheromone-based communication systems. The station wasn't trying to calm the atmosphere. It was weaponizing it against non-human physiology. The building anticipation comes from the sheer asymmetry of the defense. Phoebe stood unaffected, breathing air that smelled like her grandmother's garden. Dimitri struggled to maintain motor control as chamomile particles interacted with his nervous system. Nyx reported her taste sensors registering metallic confusion from the rosemary mist. The security systems weren't designed to stop intruders. They were designed to stop non-human intruders. Every defensive measure assumed the attackers would share the biological vulnerabilities of most galactic species. Research into chemical sensitivity shows how compounds harmless to one species can be devastating to another. The station's designers had clearly studied these interactions extensively. They hadn't built weapons. They'd built delivery systems for everyday Earth substances that happened to be uniquely effective against galactic biology. The defense strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Make the environment itself hostile to anything that wasn't human. The resolution lands with chilling clarity. The team realized they weren't fighting an external security system. They were fighting an environment engineered to be selectively hostile. The station's defenses exploited the very biological differences that made humans dangerous to others. Dimitri and Nyx weren't just companions, they were canaries in a coal mine that was actively trying to kill them. Their presence demonstrated why the security worked. Anything that couldn't tolerate Earth's chemical environment wouldn't survive to reach the inner chambers. This revelation reframed the station's design purpose. It wasn't just studying human biological threats. It was learning to weaponize human biological exceptions. The fact that humans could breathe this air, touch these surfaces, and absorb these compounds without harm wasn't a flaw in the security. It was the security. The systems were designed to be bypassed by humans and lethal to everyone else. The smooth transition emerges as Phoebe notices the pattern. The security grows more intense the further they progress, but the weapons remain consistently botanical. The station wasn't defending against intrusion. It was testing it. The hydroponics bay wasn't green. That was the first shock. The vegetation grew behind multiple containment layers, each glowing with energy fields that distorted the colors into muted grays and blues. The air tasted metallic from the filtration systems working overtime. This was the station's inner sanctum, the place where the most dangerous specimens were kept. The signs weren't subtle. Black and yellow hazard symbols flashed beside each growth chamber, with radiation level warnings for plants that on Earth would be sitting on kitchen windowsills. Capsicum plants stood in neat rows, their peppers glowing with an almost angry redness under the artificial lights. The label read, "Neurological agent, paralysis risk, lethal dosage, 0.2 grams." Garlic bulbs hung in climate-controlled units marked, "Respiratory collapse agent, airborne exposure hazard." Rosemary bushes filled entire sections with labels warning about syncopal episodes and neural short-circuiting. The plants looked ordinary. The documentation treated them like landmines. You see, real-world plants possess remarkable defensive capabilities. Some produce chemicals that deter insects. Others generate compounds that prevent competing plants from growing nearby. Earth's flora evolved in a particularly competitive environment, developing chemical weapons that most galactic species never encountered. The station hadn't collected these plants for study. It had contained them for dissection. Each specimen was being analyzed for how it could be neutralized, not how it could be utilized. The atmosphere grew heavier as they moved deeper into the bay. The air scrubbers hummed with increasing urgency. Dimitri kept his distance from the containment fields, his security training overriding any botanical curiosity. Nyx remained near the entrance, her sensors reportedly detecting molecular leakage despite the multiple barriers. They passed peppers that could stop hearts, mint that rewired brains, and oregano that apparently caused systemic organ failure in certain species. The anticipation built not from dramatic reveals, but from the accumulating weight of ordinary plants being treated like tactical warheads. They reached the central monitoring station, where the research logs lay open on multiple screens. The language had shifted from academic curiosity to defensive preparation. Studies focused on developing antidotes to plant toxins. Research into creating immune system boosters for exposed personnel. Experiments on neutralizing Earth plants' reproductive capabilities. The resolution arrived with quiet certainty. The station wasn't built to weaponize Earth biology. It was built to defend against it. The researchers weren't warmongers. They were doctors preparing for a pandemic that hadn't arrived yet. This reframed the entire operation. The extreme security measures, the evacuation, the DEATHWORLD protocol, all of it made sense if you believed Earth's biology represented an incoming ecological threat. They weren't trying to conquer with plants. They were trying to survive them. The hydroponics bay wasn't an armory. It was a vaccination research facility dealing with the most dangerous viruses they'd ever encountered. The smooth transition emerged as Phoebe accessed the final research log. The head researcher's notes described Earth's biology as the single greatest uncontained ecological threat in known space. The recommendation was clear. Develop countermeasures before contact became inevitable. The approaching security fleet wasn't coming to destroy evidence. It was coming to continue the work. Phoebe bypassed the final encryption layer with the quiet determination of someone who'd spent her career navigating bureaucratic data systems. The administrative console revealed a directory labeled Council Emergencies, with subfolders organized by threat classification. The humanity files occupied a surprisingly large section. She opened the earliest records. The first contact logs weren't celebratory. They were incident reports. The initial meeting wasn't treated as diplomatic achievement. It was logged as biological hazard exposure event, with follow-up directives for decontamination procedures. The emergency session transcripts read like disaster preparedness meetings. Council members discussed containment strategies, misinformation campaigns, and controlled disclosure timelines. They weren't debating whether to welcome humanity. They were debating how to manage humanity's inevitable expansion while minimizing ecological impact. The documents described elaborate systems of misdirection, redirecting human exploration away from sensitive ecosystems, creating buffer zones around human space, developing cultural narratives that would make humanity less interested in galactic integration. You see, governments often prepare for unknown threats by creating containment frameworks first and asking questions later. The galaxy had decided humanity was a managed problem rather than a potential partner. Research into historical first contact scenarios shows how cultures handle the unknown. Some embrace it. Some destroy it. The galaxy chose a third path, bureaucratic containment. They established protocols for steering human expansion into acceptable zones. They created cultural exchange programs designed to limit, rather than encourage, interaction. The polite exploration offers humanity received weren't invitations. They were controlled experiments in limited exposure. The building anticipation comes from realizing every interaction followed a script designed to test human behavior while preventing actual integration. The payoff lands with clinical clarity. The galaxy has been conducting emergency sessions about humanity because they see us as an uncontainable ecological force, not a civilization. A natural disaster with spaceships. The sessions focused on damage control, not diplomacy. How to prevent Earth plants from spreading. How to minimize human biological contamination. How to avoid cultural infection from human social patterns. They weren't afraid we'd attack. They were afraid we'd breathe on their ecosystems and rearrange them through accidental exposure. This discovery provided unexpected leverage. Phoebe now understood the galaxy's true concerns. Their fear wasn't military, it was biological and social. The security fleet approaching wanted sterilization and containment. But they also wanted predictability. They needed humanity managed. This gave her negotiating position unexpected strength. She wasn't just arguing for her team's survival. She was offering a new management strategy. The approaching fleet's communications confirmed the emergency session directives. Their orders emphasized complete sterilization and information containment, standard procedure for DEATHWORLD protocol events. But the subtext showed their real priority: prevent the story from reaching human authorities. The galaxy didn't want humanity knowing how they were perceived. That secrecy became her advantage. She could offer them a choice: escalate the confrontation and risk humanity discovering the truth, or negotiate a new arrangement that maintained the containment narrative while allowing limited, controlled cooperation. The smooth transition emerged as she compiled the evidence. Emergency session reports, containment protocols, misdirection strategies. She wasn't just gathering information anymore. She was building a case file. The security fleet would arrive expecting to handle a contamination event. She would greet them with a diplomatic proposal based on their own emergency session minutes. They wanted humanity contained. She would offer them a better containment strategy, one that didn't require vaporizing botanists. The security fleet arrived with the practiced efficiency of a cleanup crew responding to a scheduled hazard. 6 vessels took position around the station, their weapon systems glowing with activation sequences. The lead ship hailed the facility with a standard containment protocol message. Prepare for sterilization. Evacuate all biological material to designated safe zones. The phrasing suggested they expected compliance, not conversation. Standard procedure for DEATHWORLD protocol events. Phoebe opened a direct channel before they could initiate the sterilization sequence. She didn't use emergency frequencies or diplomatic bands. She used the internal comm system, routing through the station's administrative console. Her voice carried the calm authority of someone who'd just read the other side's playbook. Commander, I'm transmitting emergency session minutes from Stellar Cycle 38.42, Agenda Item 7. She sent the files before he could respond. I believe you'll find our situation falls under Contingency Subsection B, not Standard Sterilization Protocol. You see, diplomatic breakthroughs often occur when someone reframes the problem. The galaxy saw humanity as a containment issue. Phoebe presented them with an information management issue. The emergency sessions revealed their deepest fear wasn't human biology itself, but humanity discovering how they were perceived. She didn't argue for their innocence. She acknowledged the biological facts, then proposed a better containment strategy, controlled cooperation instead of attempted isolation. Her proposal was brutally simple. Humanity would handle its own biological contamination risks. We'd develop the protocols for managing our dangerous biology in galactic environments. We'd contain our own plants, filter our own air, monitor our own social contamination risks. In return, the galaxy would provide full transparency about which environments were most vulnerable. They'd share data on biological incompatibilities. They'd stop trying to steer human expansion through misinformation, and instead work with us to minimize ecological impact. The proposal reframed humans from threat to solution. We weren't the problem we were being asked to solve. We were the experts who could solve it. The fleet commander's initial response was silence, then a request for verification from high command, then longer silence. Phoebe had taken their emergency session concerns and built a framework that addressed every one of them more effectively than their current strategy. Instead of trying to hide the truth from humanity, she offered to make humanity partners in managing the truth. The anticipation built through the quiet hum of open channels. Weapon systems remained active but didn't advance. The sterilization countdown paused at 37 seconds. The payoff arrived with crisp clarity. Phoebe's diplomatic gambit was to call their bluff on their own bureaucracy. She used their emergency session minutes to demonstrate that their current approach was failing. The containment wasn't working. The misdirection campaigns were leaking. The only logical solution was to bring humanity into the containment process. She spoke to the commander not as a threat pleading for mercy, but as a professional proposing a more efficient operational framework. She didn't ask for trust. She proposed a mutually beneficial management strategy. The commander's response came through measured but curious. Explain how human-led containment differs from current protocols. Phoebe detailed the advantages. Humans understand human biology better than anyone. We know our own social patterns. We can predict our own expansion tendencies. Most importantly, we can manage our own ecological impact more effectively if we know what the actual risks are. The current system of secrecy meant humans were contaminating environments without even knowing we were doing it. Transparency would allow us to avoid the problems the galaxy feared most. This approach surprised the commander into considering a new framework. He'd arrived expecting to sterilize a contamination event. He found himself discussing operational efficiencies with the contamination itself. The conversation shifted from emergency protocols to long-term planning. The smooth transition emerged as the commander ordered his ships to stand down from immediate sterilization readiness. He hadn't agreed to anything yet, but he'd stopped treating them like a biological hazard and started treating them like negotiating partners. The shift was subtle but absolute. They were no longer something to be cleaned up. They were someone to be dealt with. Throughout the crisis, Phoebe had maintained one small act of normalcy. She carried a potted daisy taken from the station's collection, its roots still cradled in sterile growth medium. The plant was small, white-petaled, utterly ordinary by human standards. To the galaxy, it represented everything they feared: unchecked Earth biology, uncontrolled reproduction, ecological contamination. Its very existence in her hands violated multiple containment protocols. Yet she held it not as a threat, but as an offering. She presented the daisy to the fleet commander through the video link. Not in a threatening way, not as a demonstration of power, simply as a plant, a living thing that required specific conditions to survive. She explained its needs: the soil pH, the sunlight requirements, the water cycle. She described how humans cultivated such plants for decoration, for sentiment, for simple beauty. The tension was palpable. On the commander's screen, the daisy represented potential planetary-scale ecological disruption. In Phoebe's hands, it was just a flower. You see, symbols can bridge cultural divides by reframing perceived threats. A flag represents territory. A handshake represents agreement. A flower represents growth. By presenting the daisy as a test case rather than a weapon, Phoebe shifted the conversation from containment to cooperation. She proposed a simple experiment. Instead of sterilizing Earth biology, they would learn to manage it together. The daisy would be the first joint project. Humans would handle the biological containment. The galaxy would provide the environmental oversight. The building anticipation came from the sheer simplicity of the gesture. The commander watched the plant through the video feed, his sensors undoubtedly analyzing its pollen dispersion risk, its reproductive rate, its chemical signature. But he also saw Phoebe handling it without protective gear. He saw the ordinary pot, the simple soil, the commonness of the thing. The most dangerous plants in the galaxy apparently came in plain ceramic containers. The payoff arrived with quiet symbolism. The potted daisy became the most watched plant in galactic history because it represented a new approach to interspecies relations. Instead of hiding from dangerous biology, they would manage it openly. Instead of fearing contamination, they would develop shared protocols. The daisy's image spread across galactic networks not as a warning, but as a curiosity. A thing both dangerous and delicate, a problem that might also be a solution. Research into symbolic communication shows how simple objects can reframe complex relationships. The daisy didn't change the biological facts. Earth plants remained dangerous to galactic ecosystems, but it changed the context. The commander agreed to a trial period. The daisy would be placed in a secure but observable facility. Human experts would manage its containment. Galactic scientists would monitor its effects. They would learn together. This symbolic act helped convince the fleet commander to try cooperation because it offered a manageable first step. Instead of debating planetary-scale policies, they would start with one plant. Instead of confronting the entire DEATHWORLD protocol, they would create a small exception. The smooth transition emerged as the commander ordered his ships to standby positions. The sterilization countdown canceled. The daisy would live. They would watch it together. The agreement that emerged didn't read like a treaty. It read like a safety manual co-authored by opposing legal teams. The fleet commander accepted Phoebe's proposal with the cautious enthusiasm of someone agreeing to store explosives in their basement because the alternative was leaving them in the street. The framework established a new division of responsibilities. Humanity would manage its own biological risks. The galaxy would provide full environmental transparency. This meant humans would develop containment protocols for Earth organisms, while receiving accurate data about which environments were most vulnerable. You see, cooperative safety programs in high-risk environments work best when each party handles what they understand best. Humans know human biology. The galaxy knows galactic ecosystems. The tension came from the accountability measures. Both sides would monitor each other's compliance. Human vessels would carry galactic observers to verify proper containment procedures. Galactic worlds would accept human inspection teams to confirm environmental protections. The system relied on mutual suspicion, creating mutual assurance. This arrangement reframed humans as catalysts for safer exploration rather than aggressors. Instead of being the problem that needed containing, we became the specialists who could solve containment challenges. Our dangerous biology became our qualifications. Our tendency to form cross-species relationships became an asset for building cooperative frameworks. The anticipation built through the detailed accountability measures, regular joint inspections, shared data platforms, emergency response coordination. The agreement treated trust as something built through verification, not sentiment. Research into high-risk cooperation shows that the most effective systems involve clear responsibilities and transparent monitoring. The framework didn't ask anyone to trust blindly. It asked everyone to verify constantly. Humans would be responsible for preventing ecological contamination from our biology. The galaxy would be responsible for preventing diplomatic contamination through misinformation. Both sides would have oversight regarding the other's performance. The resolution arrived with practical finality. Rescue shuttles approached the station, their designs unlike any human vessels. They docked with precise efficiency. The team boarded with their symbolic daisy, now housed in a double-contained botanical transport unit. The station systems registered their departure and initiated full lockdown procedures. Blast doors sealed, containment fields activated. Sterilization protocols ran their sequences. The place became exactly what it was always meant to be. A sealed repository of knowledge too dangerous for casual exposure. The smooth transition emerged as their shuttle cleared the station's perimeter. The facility shrank behind them, its lights blinking once before going dark. It would remain there, silent and sealed, a monument to what happens when bureaucracy meets biology, a reminder that some truths are too volatile to release but too important to destroy. The knowledge inside wouldn't be lost. It would simply wait for a time when both species were ready to handle it without triggering emergency protocols. The shuttle turned toward the galactic vessels, their weapon systems now powered down but still visible. The commander's ship opened a docking bay, its interior lights gleaming with that particular sterile brightness that suggested they'd recently upgraded their decontamination systems. The Daisy's transport unit hummed quietly as environmental systems adjusted to maintain its specific requirements. Nobody celebrated. They simply proceeded with the careful professionalism of people who'd just agreed to manage mutually assured destruction through paperwork and verification. The shuttle drifted away from the station, its engines humming with the subdued efficiency of a vehicle that knew it was being watched. Through the viewport, the facility shrank to a distant speck, its lights now extinguished, its systems sealed. Inside, the team sat in the peculiar silence that follows negotiated survival. The air carried the sterile scent of the galactic vessel's environmental systems, a constant reminder that their atmosphere was being filtered and monitored. The potted daisy sat secured in its containment unit, its white petals looking absurdly peaceful under the glow of status lights. Phoebe watched the stars slide past, their patterns unfamiliar. Humanity's place among them had fundamentally shifted. We weren't explorers discovering new frontiers. We were dangerous neighbors being granted conditional visitation rights. The paradox settled over them with the weight of bureaucratic inevitability. Humans represented both the galaxy's deadliest biological threat and its most promising management solution. Our adaptability and resilience, the traits that allowed us to thrive in Earth's demanding environment, were precisely what made us feared. You see, societies often struggle with groups that are both valuable and dangerous. The useful outsider who brings needed skills but disrupts social order. The immigrant community that contributes economically while challenging cultural norms. The galaxy now faced this dilemma on a species-wide scale. Research into social dynamics shows that the most successful integrations occur when perceived threats are reframed as managed risks. The new alliance framework attempted exactly this. Humanity would handle its own biological containment while receiving galactic oversight. We would be responsible for preventing the ecological disasters others feared we might cause. Our dangerous biology became our professional qualification. Our tendency to form cross-species relationships became a diplomatic asset, rather than a security concern. The anticipation builds from the sheer novelty of the arrangement. Nobody had ever tried to be friends with the galaxy's most dangerous species before. The payoff arrives with quiet significance. The new alliance that emerges isn't based on trust or friendship. It's based on mutual accountability and transparent suspicion. Humanity gains access to galactic space while accepting permanent monitoring of our biological impact. The galaxy gains experts who can manage the very threats they feared most. The agreement treats both parties as potential hazards that need managing. Humans are dangerous biological entities. The galactic institutions are dangerous bureaucratic entities. Both require oversight. This arrangement closes with both hope and terror. Hope because cooperation offers better outcomes than isolation. Terror because the margin for error remains catastrophically small. One misplaced plant specimen could still trigger ecological collapse. One misunderstood social gesture could still cause diplomatic incidents. The framework doesn't eliminate risks. It simply provides protocols for managing them. The team's shuttle approaches the gleaming galactic vessels, their surfaces reflecting the unfamiliar constellations. They aren't being welcomed as heroes or explorers. They're being processed as successfully contained hazards who have negotiated better living conditions. The narrative doesn't end with handshakes or celebrations. It ends with environmental scans and decontamination procedures. The Daisy enters a quarantine facility, where both human and galactic scientists will observe it through multiple security barriers. The team undergoes medical checks that monitor their biological impact on the ship's systems. The relationship begins not with openness but with carefully measured boundaries. They have achieved not friendship, but a sustainable professional arrangement between potentially incompatible partners. The stars continue their silent movement outside the viewports, indifferent to the bureaucratic arrangements being made in their light. The galaxy's elaborate containment protocols reveal less about actual danger than about institutional inertia. Massive bureaucratic systems often crystallize around perceived threats, rather than evaluated risks. Consider our own safety regulations. How many exist because someone once misunderstood a situation and wrote a rule that nobody later questioned? That sealed station now drifts in silence, its archives full of terrifying conclusions drawn by researchers who never actually met a human. It stands as a perfect monument to knowledge considered too dangerous to release, yet too consequential to destroy. Sometimes the scariest protocols are written by committees that fear paperwork more than reality.